Hello and welcome to The Long View, a podcast that takes a closer look at the games people play. The Long View is a proud member of the Dice Tower Network. Go to dicetower.com and see what Tom and Eric and the gang have available for you. It is a fantastic clearinghouse for news, reviews, commentary, you name it, they've got it. There's a host of sister podcasts on the Dice Tower Network. Check them out as well. That's dicetower.com. The Long View is proud to be sponsored by GameSurplus.com. Go to GameSurplus.com for all of your online board gaming purchasing needs. Whether it's the latest, greatest title that has just been released, or whether it's a hard-to-find import, fresh from Essen, GameSurplus.com is going to be able to track it down for you at an unbelievable price. Their customer service is truly legendary. Their packaging is tremendous. Their shipping speed is lightning fast. They have a sterling reputation, and it's because of all of the great service that they give and the value that they provide. Velma Smucker and the rest of her family will be working hard to get you your games as soon as they become available. If you have a question or if you're looking for something in particular, shoot them an email at games@gamesurplus.com. Tell them what you're looking for, and they'll track it down for you. That's gamesurplus.com. I also, of course, want to give a special shout-out to my local game store. That's the Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. It is conveniently located off of Interstate 80. It is right in the northeastern Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, and southern New York region. So if you're a gamer and you're looking for a place that has the latest and greatest titles, if you're looking for a friendly and knowledgeable staff, a great place to go and game, look no farther than the Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, right on Main Street. And if you come in and stop by, be sure to tell them that The Long View sent you. My name is Jeff Gamble. I'm the host of The Long View, and tonight I am very pleased to be joined by Ryan Sturm. Ryan was gracious enough to agree to be on the show tonight. I reached out to him when I finally got around and had the chance to playing Age of Steam. And so I knew I wanted to do an episode about this game once I played it a couple of times. And when I put the question to the community on my forums for the Longview Guild, everyone's like, oh, you got to ask Ryan. You got to ask Ryan. So sure enough, I sent him a message, and he was kind enough to agree to be on the show. So Ryan, of course, is well known to everybody for his work on Ludology and for his own How to Play podcast. So I want to say it's quite an honor to have you on the show tonight. I've followed your work for years, and thank you for agreeing to be here.
Oh, you're very welcome. I was shocked by two things there in your opening. First, that it took you so long to actually play Age of Steam after all of my, my Dice Tower segments and my praise of it. And, I've just been spreading the word. I would hope that you would have played it within days instead of years. It makes me so sad. And secondly, that on your forums, people actually requested to hear me. That's quite surprising.
Oh, no. You can't be that modest. You are probably in the vanguard there for being the all-time saber rattler, I think, for Age of Steam. And I think there's another game you're very fond of as well. I think you actually have been a big fan of Kalis for a little while, haven't you?
Yeah, I heard you did an episode on that one, and I never got the jingle jangle. What's going on with that, sir?
Well, Joel Eddy said he wanted to do that one, and because that's one of his favorite games of all time. And
probably
as we were
heard about it through me, so
probably did. I got to admit that. And we did talk about you on the show. We said, I'm sure Ryan's ears are burning as we record this episode about Kalis, the other all-time favorite game. So I am actually very glad that you were willing to come on tonight. I really do appreciate it. I have learned quite a few games by listening to your podcast. You kind of picked up for me, Ryan, where I left off with Scott Nicholson. Scott did just amazing video work for years and years. I used to love news of his new videos coming out, because he would not only review the game, but he would really kind of teach you the game. Sometimes I barely even needed to look at the rule book by the time I was done watching a Scott Nicholson video. And I always appreciated what he did. And then, he decided to move on to other pursuits. And that's when I kind of became aware of your podcast. And I was like, oh, great. Here's somebody who's doing the same thing. But, in all this great detail and, you do, sometimes you have like a little guest personality of yours, shall we say, who's on the show with you to help you explain games. And so it's been a lot of fun. So I appreciate the work that you've done for the community, and I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that and thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I guess I'm kind of at the same cycle. Scott Nicholson went pretty hard for a few years and like devoted his life to creating these amazing videos. And then I think he did for about 5 years. I think 5 years is sort of the life cycle maybe of that passion of the hobby. And then, you kind of get to a point where, all right, the excitement kind of wears away and other things in life start becoming interesting. And, you realize you're missing out on some other things and you want to just kind of send your time and energy to some other things. So I was hard and heavy into the podcasting, especially How to Play Podcast was a very time demanding show.
Oh, yeah.
And so especially I have 2 little kids that, when I started How to Play, I didn't have any kids. And now I have 2 that run around all the time, and it's hard to say, all right, sorry, I can't play with you little guys this weekend because I gotta, edit some podcasts. So, you go through those phases of things, but it's always glad to hear that people appreciate the time and effort you put in to contribute to the community.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I know that you've been very open and talking about how your growing family has impacted the volume of work that you've put out, but we all understand that because we've all been there, and I think you're also definitely right when you say after you've been doing things for a while and really deep into the hobby, after a while you start to kind of maybe get a little bit jaded, and I sense that with Scott as well, as he was kind of doing some of his later videos, and I've even found that a little bit in myself. I look at some of the new games that have come out, and more and more, Ryan, I'm finding myself kind of being like, yeah, that's nice. Yeah, okay. And then I think, well, when I first got into the hobby and I played that game, I'd have been all over it. I would have thought it was the most awesome thing I'd ever seen. And now I'm kind of like, well, yeah, that's pleasant. That's okay. And, I call them like my dreaded 7s now. It's like, okay, using that sort of BGG ranking, it's like, it's a good game. I'm usually willing to play it, but I find that the games that really kind of fire my enthusiasm are getting farther and farther between. And, some people say, well, that's because there's too many games put out. It's because of Kickstarter. It's because of this or that. I think it might just be because, when I look at sort of my collection and the games that I've played, I mean, we're well over 500 games, 500 rule sets floating around in my head. And I'm sure it's at least that much for you. And after a while, I think the bloom comes off the rose a little bit. And it's not so much that I don't know about you, I don't want to speak for you. I still really enjoy gaming. I have a great time, but I'm not as surprised by it as I used to be. I'm not surprised by that new game. I'm like, I've never seen anything like this before. I enjoy the gaming for the time that I'm spending with people rather than, this kind of new shiny thing that I'm looking at and say, oh, wow, this is just amazing. I don't know if that mirrors your experience at all, but, that's certainly, I think, been mine a little bit. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this kind of long view idea of let's look at games that have been around for a long time. Games like Age of Steam. So, by way of segue,
I think your experience speaks for what a lot of people have been feeling about the board gaming hobby. And, my observation, I feel exactly the same way. In fact, the other day, I ripped open a brand new game that was in the shrink, and I read through the rules, and I was like, I kind of feel like I've played that game already. It was worker placement and there were some interesting twists on it, but I was just I wasn't really excited at all to play it. I could put that directly on the to sell shelf at this point. I think it's because we, us that were new to the hobby last 5-10 years, we've been playing catch up the last 30 years. We've been enjoying, experiencing the greatest games of the last 10, 20, 30 years of playing all these amazing, unique, interesting mechanics and have gotten spoiled. And yes, new things are developing, but they're not going to develop at the rate at which we consume games. And so there's a lot of, all these new games are coming out, but there's not as much new about them as there was when we were in that discovery period. We have now such a wide cadre is not the right word, but a wide selection of mechanics that we already have experienced, that to have any new experience come out of that it's rare and difficult. But I'll tell you, I've got a game group that we meet every couple weeks, and we are running an Age of Steam league, and we are, playing it every couple of weeks. We're going to play, 5 games and tally it and play it. It's 12 years old now, and I've got hundreds of games, and I've got, 10, 15 games I haven't played yet that are on the shelf, but Age of Steam is the one we still all want to play.
Well, it's wonderful to hear you kind of echo that sort of idea that, there's been this huge sort of avalanche of new games and all of this kind of exploration that we've all enjoyed. And yet there are still those games like Age of Steam that we're going to be talking about tonight that are kind of like the keepers. They're the ones you're always going to come back to. They're the ones that have truly stood the test of time. And I think the challenge, at least for me, has been trying to figure out, well, why does that happen with this game and not this other game? Why does this work so well in this setting but not in that? Is it the connection of theme? Is it a elegant set of mechanics? Is it a simple, streamlined gameplay? Is it complex gameplay? What is it? This idea of emergence that people like to talk about now. Games revealing greater depth the more you play, or is it player interaction? There's so many kind of questions, but clearly there are some games that have really just kind of stood up. And when you look at things like the Board Game Geek rankings and you see the list of games, there are some venerable games that withstand the kind of flood. They withstand the push and the pressure of all the new, latest, greatest things. And they kind of hang around there. And so when I look at that kind of top 200, 300 list of games, there's some titles that always kind of jump out at me. And Age of Steam was one of them, quite frankly, because one of the things I want to talk to you about tonight is I kind of, backed my way into Age of Steam. My experience with train games really started with Railways of the World. I had a buddy when I first got into the hobby. He had a copy. I was, of course, completely blown away by it. I was like, look at these plastic water towers. Look at these. The map was huge, and I was drooling over it. I'm like, this game takes up my whole table, which is kind of funny because, when I circle back to that then later became a problem for me. But originally, I was just so geeked out by it. And I love the production value. And you got these little plastic trains, and you build your track and all of these cards, and it was just an amazing experience. And I love the game, and I bought a lot of the expansions for it. And then after a while, I kind of started getting this feeling that, man, there's a lot of bloat here. There's a lot of beautiful components and things, but actually, when I take out my Railways of the World, or I take out Railways of England and Wales, and I play with the full stock variant, there's I have to set up separate tables even to kind of play this game. And I remember thinking, man, it's a pain to set up. It takes forever. It's huge. Now it's kind of I used to love it for just the eye candy value, and it's certainly a good game, and I would still play it if somebody suggested it. But then I started thinking man, that's a huge box. I don't have space for it. What else is out there? And so I ended up finding Steam, because Steam had come out maybe a year or so before I started to look around for a Switch. Funny, I didn't go back to Age of Steam. I went to Steam, probably because it was newer and it was in stores. And so I grabbed Steam, totally not aware of everything that had happened before that. And really came to appreciate Steam quite a bit, because I was like, okay, this is kind of the same experience. A little more intense, a little more of a knife fight. There's less room. You've got these new kind of roles that you're taking here, and the way the tracked work I liked, and it was a more compact experience, not just physically, but in terms of gameplay. I really enjoyed it. And then finally, after listening to you for years and other people, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to go back. I'm going to try Age of Steam. And so I finally got that to the table. And it was a really interesting experience for me, because so much of it, I was like, well, this is Steam. This is almost exactly the same game. And then I started looking at, okay, well, the financing is completely different. It's not the same. You have to give up those shares to get your initial capital. You have to really figure out how much you need. That's a difference, and it's a little more brutal. And then the goods growth thing. The goods growth thing blew my mind, because this is now not just take an action, grab a set of cubes that you want and throw them wherever you want them, as it is with Steam. Now, you have this die roll. There's some randomness, and you might be depending on something to come out, and it doesn't. Or things get depleted on you, and you're like, oh, man, what am I going to do? Now I have to use some of, my actions, basically, just to put cubes on the chart in the hopes that they might come out. And so it opened up a whole nother kind of layer. So there was a lot of familiarity, but there was a lot of things that were very different, and I really appreciated that. So once I started playing it, I got bit by the bug a little bit. I said, all right, I got to do an episode about Age of Steam, and you were the guy that came to mind. So that is kind of my backstory on how I came to Age of Steam, literally backing into it. What can you tell us about your experience? How did you first, become aware of Age of Steam, and how did you get hooked on it?
I first learned of Age of Steam back way in the dark ages in 2002, and there was this website called the Games Journal. Did you ever read the Games Journal?
No,
never did. Games Journal was a fantastic website. I don't know if I was even on the Geek, or the Geek wasn't really that big of a deal at that point. But there was this website called the Games Journal, and it talked about hobby games, and there were these articles, and they had these writers, and they were really good. One person did a five-part article on ethics in games. It was very well written. There's a very nice article about teaching games. I'll have to look up who the webmaster of this. We talked about that 5-year cycle of passion. I think this guy had the same kind of experience. I think he might have did it for about 3-4 years, and it's a very well done site. But I think he gave it up in 2005, 2006. But I read this article about, the new hot games that were coming out, and it talked about Age of Steam, and I thought, oh, that was pretty cool. And so we went, back in the days of yore, before I had children, we'd make the trek from out in New Hampshire out to where I lived in Minnesota. We would drive, and in the summer I'm a school teacher, and there just happened to be these large game conventions in the way in between. So I had to convince my wife that we had to stop at Gen Con or Origins. I don't remember which one. But, it was like a 2-day deal because my wife's along. And so you got to compromise them, 1 day, 3 day, 2 days. And so, we're there for our 2 days. And I said, all right, one of the things, I got to try this Age of Steam. So we tried that. My wife wasn't terribly thrilled, but I thought it was really neat. Obviously, the first time you play this game, it's tough. I mean, I remember just being squeamish, like, oh, am I going to make it? And loving it from that first game of being like, oh, can I pull through, or am I going to go bankrupt? My things keep going backwards and being in debt, and that's what it is about me that makes me love this game, is feeling the pressure of Age of Steam. And that's what's going to separate someone between someone who gets excited by Age of Steam and someone that wants to play Steam or Railways of the World. If you like pressure and tension, then you want Age of Steam. If that drives you and gets you excited about a gameplay experience, then this is the game for you. Similarly, like Twilight Struggle has a ton of that. The other versions kind of cut that out, and later on, so I played that one play. It was Christmas time coming up, and I chose to go with the Railways of the World. It was Railroad Tycoon back then, I guess, and I got it because it was prettier, and it was also, at that time, I was still in like, I'm going to play these games with my family mode, like in this disbelief of, I'm going to teach my neighbors and they're really going to like this. My coworkers, I'm going to teach Railroad Tycoon too, and they're going to come over. Like, no, they're not going to. But this is what I was believing at that point. So I wanted to get the pretty, little easier. I knew this one was a little easier. And played it a few times. It's got that East Coast issue where everybody wants to build on the East Coast. And the other thing I found is I was just missing that, like, where was that tension from that other game that I played? Well, I went to a convention in Niagara Falls and met up with some great guys from Canada who taught me, and we became friends, Age of Steam buddies for the next 5, 7, 8 years. They taught me to play, really to play. I mean, I knew how to play, but they taught me what it really was to play Age of Steam, the nastiness, the taunts, the competitive experience, the stab you in the back, the the competitive experience that you can have with this game that you can't have with many other games in our hobby. And we played one game of that, and it was just a fierce game. And that was like, wow, this is kind of the experience that I really want. I want a fierce competitive game. And so I was up in Canada for something. We were at a Mark Knopfler concert. And we were
nice.
It was at Toronto, and we were sort of walking around the city, and we went into some random game shop. This was like 2006 or so, and Age of Steam had been out of print for a while, and they just have a copy of Age of Steam randomly sitting on their shelf, and it was way overpriced, but I'm like, Kristen, I'm getting this. And she was not very happy with that, but I got it, and I got my Age of Steam first edition in Toronto, and it was one of the best purchases I've ever made. I've probably played that copy probably at least 100 times now. Then a few years later, this was before Steam actually came out. There was all the fiasco of whenever it was going to come out. Steam came out, and I was very, very hesitant because I loved Age of Steam. I mean, I loved it like my mama. And so for him to say, okay, I'm going to take this game and I'm going to make it more simplified. And, in my head, I'm like, wait, we already have that game. It's called Railroad Tycoon. Why would you make that game again? But the idea was to really kind of keep the base of the system and make it simpler. I think he was trying to see if this could be a hit. I think the idea was that, if he really streamed this down, that this could be kind of a Ticket to Ride type game if he dialed it down a few notches. But, it never was quite that game. It's still really respected. A lot of people like it. But the original diehard Age of Steam heads that want the tension are missing it from that Steam game. The number one reason, it's very easy to know why, is the way the shares work in the game. You can you never feel like you're going to go bankrupt in Steam. And I don't know, that's part of the joy. Maybe I'm a crazy sadistic man, but part of the joy is feeling like, oh, am I going to make it? Am I going to make it? That clawing your way up. And it's about that, the narrative structure of this game. You start like in a hole and you work your way up. And then it should take, in a proper Age of Steam map, it should take about half to 2/3 of the way through the game where you make $1. People hand you $1, and in our table,
you're like,
when that happens, everybody gives you a round of applause. It's like this moment, like, woo! It's like you cured cancer. It's the greatest thing ever. In Steam, you're like, okay, I'll take a bunch of money. Every turn, you can just, you can take a bunch of money, and you lose it. You lose everything not everything, but a large part of what drives my love of the game.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those recollections and those very specific points about why you feel, this game is different from the other kind of offerings. Because, I think I had the same delusion you did, with Railways of the World. This is going to be the one. People are going to want to play this with me. The lies we tell ourselves. That's right up there with the. No, I bought this game for you.
Oh yeah.
I bought this. I bought this with you in mind. I really thought you would like. This wasn't about me, baby. It was about you.
I bought my wife a Rock Band guitar once, and because we only have one, and what if we both want to play guitar at the same time? But honey, I love you. It didn't.
I did it for you.
It did not go well.
No,
it doesn't. But I think there's something to what you're saying about how, both Railways of the World and Steam are a kindler, gentler versions. I think Railways of the World is probably the kindest, unless you're playing the England and Wales version with the full-on stock mode, in which case it's very brutal and kind of cutthroat all on its own. But that was kind of like my quest. Even back then, I was just like, okay, if I get this England and Wales with the stock variant that's in the box there, that's going to pretty much be Age of Steam. That's what it's going to be. And it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't. And I was kind of surprised by that, So I was like, okay, that's not really what I thought it was going to be.
You mentioned the
Can I speak
tightness
to
of money.
that England and
Oh,
Wales?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we tried that a couple
Yeah.
times. I was kind of excited about that. Like, this is going to be, it's sold as sort of mini 18XX or a shorter 18XX, and it's really underdeveloped. And when you play it, it feels half baked and kind of wonky. And there's only a few pages of rules, but you're checking them all the time. It's not quite right. There's not it's not elegant at all. It's a bit of a mess, I find.
Yeah, I would agree, because my experiences with it was kind of a beast. Not only was it a beast on the table, not only was it a beast, but it just trying to wrap your mind around. I mean, I've played plenty of games where you are investing in railroads. You're not actually running a single railroad. I played plenty of games like that, but England and Wales was a little bit more difficult to manage. It was a little wonky, and I really compare that with what I think is one of his underappreciated games, which is Steel Driver, which is probably it's the simplest stock game I think I've ever played. And it's very enjoyable, at least to me. I think it is almost gateway in its simplicity. It's such an easy game to teach, an easy game to play. And where it gets hard is when you really want to try to win it, because the sort of cube distribution on the map at the end of the game is so crucial. Turn order is so important at the end of the game that a new player is really going to struggle with that. But getting back to England and Wales, I kind of felt like that was almost like that system, but with just all of this kind of bloat, and it was really difficult to wrap your mind around it and to actually play it. So I didn't find it very enjoyable. And then I come to find out that that's not really what Steam's all about anyway, and that was more of kind of an 18XX thing. So I thought, okay, all right, so I want to check out this Steam. And one of the things that I noticed immediately was what you talked about, the tightness of the money, the knowledge that for every share that you issue to capitalize, it's going to hurt you at the end of the game. So, you can get money if you want it. You can kind of calculate how much you would like in your kind of Christmas wish list of where do I want to build my track, what do I want to do. But at the end of the game, if you issue a lot of shares, you're going to take a big hit. And so it's a real tense decision, I found, every single round, trying to figure out how much money do I need, how much money do I want, and then how much do I need to temper my wants with what everybody else is doing. If other people aren't issuing shares at the same rate that I am, I'm really going to start to worry about that a little bit, unless I'm convinced I can make a great play with long deliveries. I'm playing the long game, and I'm going to make it back. The other thing that I found really interesting and different about the game was this whole ridiculous income adjustment thing. This actually was the one part of the game that I wasn't particularly fond of. It was kind of like, it seemed very artificial to me. It's like, okay, so I'm making money, I'm moving up the track. Okay, things are going great, and now you have to now go back. And it was like, okay, all right, so now I'm kind of struggling. Now, from a game design standpoint, I'm like, okay, this is kind of a way to rein in a runaway leader a little bit. It's a way to keep things tight. But at the same time, from a thematic standpoint, I was kind of a little bit taken aback by that. I was just like, okay, this whole, what is it called? The income reduction or whatever?
Income reduction.
Yeah. And that was something that I wasn't a real fan of. Now, when I played the game, it worked fine. But I remember it kind of rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. And so I was curious what you thought of the whole income reduction mechanic and what your memories of that were, how you feel about it now, and what you would have to say about that. Because that's the one area of the game that I was not really a fan of when I played it.
Sure. I want to speak one point you mentioned earlier about, one of the things you had asked me about was, what drives me about this game? What's so great about it? Well, I could talk about that for hours and hours. So let me make one more point about that clear, shall I?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned,
Absolutely.
that issuing shares is such a tense decision. What I love about Age of Steam is it's not just there. It's every phase. You have a tough decision to make. In a turn, you have to make a difficult decision, and a lot of them, drive one another. A lot of them come from that initial decision about how many shares you're going to take to drive some of the other decisions, but they still are quite difficult. Then the auction, which is amazing, deciding how much to bid, because if you overbid, it can totally kill you. Picking which action you're going to do can be critical. Laying your track, where are you going to lay that track? Where are you going to lay that third piece of track? Are you going to add a little extra nib? Moving goods, which good do I move first? Or do I upgrade my locomotive? Each one of those is an interesting and interactive decision, which is one of the reasons that I love this game. But to your point on income reduction, I love income reduction. I think it's great. To the outsider, to the layman, to the Age of Steam newbie, it's easy to look at it when the first time you play it and you say, okay, so whoever's ahead gets dragged back a couple of points. Oh, that's just a cheesy catch the leader mechanism or mechanic or whichever of those you like. It is and it isn't, because as you say, it works. In fact, it's a necessary element of the game, because the great thing about Age of Steam is, you talk about different paths to victory. There's multiple ways to play it, and you have to adjust based on what the players at your table are doing. You can play a very aggressive strategy, which is to take a lot of shares, to bully people by high bidding and getting the most powerful actions in the best spots on the board. And by doing that, you can get a nice hefty lead. But that's why income reduction has to be there, to kind of balance that strategy out. The opposite strategy is to play a tight share game, to not take very many shares at all, to very limit making very small bids, often just passing and bidding for zero, of carefully avoiding building in the mountains, just trying to spend as little as possible, because you know that those people that they're ahead, when you take shares, when they take more shares than you, if you have less shares, that lead never goes away. If they get more income than you, then that lead is not as valuable as having less shares. Once you played it enough, you know that those things are not equal. Having less shares is not equal to as having more income. Because of that reduction, when you get further up the scale, you slide back more. It balances the two strategies out, as well as it. If you want to, and I like to say it, is it does have a thematic mechanical connection. You think about what happens when companies get big. Well, they become less efficient, and so that is the thematic explanation as to why that happens. But as far as like balance purposes in the game, it's essential, because if it was not there, not only would it cause there to be more of a runaway leader, but it would heavily favor the game towards players wanting to just take more shares and outbid another, and that low share strategy wouldn't be as effective. And that it's a very important part that's there, because it's a very fun and challenging game to play. It's one of the hardest games to play, but also the most rewarding, because they're way up there, but at the end that you can catch up.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your insight about that, because, I kind of recognized that, it was necessary for kind of holding someone back a little bit. But I just kind of thematically, I didn't really get it. There wasn't really anything for me to hang my hat on. This inefficiency of larger corporations, at least that's something that I can wrap my mind around. But it was an odd kind of a part of the game. It was like a rule for the sake of a rule is kind of what it felt like to me. So you've given a little bit of underpinning that I think is going to be helpful to me to kind of wrap my mind around it. I still don't know that I'm a huge fan of it, only because it still feels artificial to me. But clearly, you've done a great job of explaining that it's very necessary. And I have played games. I haven't played a ton of games, but I've played enough games now that I've seen exactly what you're talking about. And that's because my wife is a very conservative player. Any kind of game that involves auction or bidding or loans, I mean, she hates to take a loan. Like I beat her regularly in London because she just does not want to take loans.
I was afraid it was going to end there, that you just beat her regularly.
No. I'm not a pro football player.
Oh!
Can't believe he said, oh!
That's a terrible thing to say. There's a lot of great pro football players, but that's a whole nother topic. But anyway, I'm able to kind of win very consistently in London because of her sort of she just loathes to take a loan, and so in Age of Steam she was doing the same thing. And I was like, oh man, she's not taking any risks. She's playing it real conservative. It's not going to go well for her. You got to spend money to make money. You got to take a chance. You got to be aggressive every once in a while. She'll see. It's going to be another one of those games. And darned if she didn't almost beat me. I was kind of the one that was pushing the share limits. I think I ended up with 7 or 8 shares. I think it was 7 shares issued, which I believe is a 21 victory point reduction, because I think it's -3 for every share, if I'm remembering right. And she had issued, I think, a grand total of 3 or 4 shares, and had operated very, very small, very local, but very wisely. She kind of spent a lot more time trying to restock cities, and just making deliveries that she could. She didn't spend a ton of money. She didn't make a fortune, but she didn't issue a lot of shares. And lo and behold, at the end of the game, she was right in there. And I remember being a little surprised by that. So I think that's probably proof of the point that you were making earlier, which is, that income reduction there is important, because you do get victory points for where you are on the income track, but that income reduction thing will slap you back a little bit. And if you're right on that kind of border and you happen to actually go up, I remember at some points in the game, Ryan, trying to calculate, how can I stay in a band? Because if I go 1 into the next band, I'm actually going to get smacked harder than if I stay kind of where I am in this particular income band. And so that was all these other weird decisions that I had to make in these calculations of, I don't want to go too far because then I'll take, 1 step forward and 10 steps back. So it was really interesting. And I think, even as I'm talking about it mechanically, I like it mechanically. It's just thematically, I didn't really particularly care for it. Did you ever find, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is, maybe some advice that you have, some strategy kind of ideas. You know what I'm talking about, these bands?
Yes. And in fact, that was the other thing I had to tell you about that income reduction. And the other reason that it's awesome is, you talked about emergence earlier. I mean, a lot of emergence comes out of that rule. It's a little gamey, but it adds actually quite a bit of interesting dynamics within the game, because here's, this is a basic tip, is you kind of want to plan, if you haven't played the game a lot, ending a turn on 10 is better than ending a turn on 11. And this is kind of goofy, but the end result is actually kind of neat, because you have to plan your strategy around it. Because the reason is because at the end of the turn, if you're above 10, you slide down by 2. Now you get the money for it. You'll get the extra $1, but your score will go down to 9, whereas the end result before would be 10. If you're a savvy player, you're going to plan and say, all right, what turn am I going to get to 10? I mean, usually I think it's turn 3, I want to say, because you'll make a move for 2 on turn 1. On turn 2, maybe you'll get up to 6, and then maybe on turn 3, you'll get up to 4. You'll move a 4, you'll end exactly on 10. So, generally that's about the ideal situation, and turn 3 exactly on 10. Now, the fun part of this is we have a term. I talked about my nasty Canadian friends. What they like to do is, say I play my turn and I'm on 10. Aha, I have cleverly manipulated myself at 10, and it's the end of the turn. Well, then, of course, my Canadian buddy Rob sees, he doesn't like me because I'm American. He sees that I'm at 10, and because I'm me, he sees that I'm at 10, and he says, all right, I'm going to move 3 for me and 1 for Ryan, putting him at 11. Ha, ha, ha. And we have affectionately called this the maple shove, because by giving me points, they've actually taken points away from me. And it actually becomes quite an important part of the game, and people look to do that when they see, people try to end on 10 or they try to end on 20, and if someone gets there, good players are going to look at it and say, oh, I can maple shove you, and there you go. I mean, it's my goal to get that into the Age of Steam lexicon, maple shove, by saying it as many times as possible. I did do an episode with Age of Steam luminary Ted Alspach, where we talked for about, a while about Age of Steam strategy. And well, we actually talked for 2 hours. We split it up into one about just strategy and one about maps. So I encourage your listeners to check that out, but I can give you the quick and dirty of what to do on Age of Steam. First of all, as the good man Kenny Rogers said, you got to know when to hold them and you got to know when to fold them. You cannot play Age of Steam in a tunnel, and you have to know when to be aggressive and know when not to be aggressive. A lot of that comes from the biggest number one thing is this, and I think actually I'm stealing this from Ted Alsbach from our conversation, is the really good players are thinking about not what they're trying to do. The mediocre players and the new players are intensely focused on, all right, where am I going to build turn 2? Where am I going to build turn 3? The players that have played this game 10, 20 times are thinking, where does Rob want to build? Where does Kevin want to move his cube? What action does Andrew want to take? Because once I know what all of you are trying to do, I know who's going to try to bid high. I know if I need to build before someone. I know if I need to move a cube before you do. I know if I need to extend that track or if I can leave it hanging and build onto it later. So, this game, the next thing that I love about it is it has a huge learning curve. I feel like every time I play this game, I think like, oh, I could have done, especially if I lose, I think, oh, I could have done that. And the first few games are going to be figuring out your network and figuring out how do you build a good network. Tip, build a circle. If you can build a circle, that's what you want to do. Or what I call a dog bone. So you got a straight shape and 2 V's on the end so that you have lots of different points for long deliveries. And then you're also going to figure out, all right, you're not going to deliver a lot of ones. You probably don't want to deliver any ones, maybe 1 on the first turn. So you're probably going to look for a 2 move on turn 2, upgrade, move a 2. By turn 3, hopefully you can make a 4 move. You really are looking to jump up that high. By turn 5, if you can make a 6 move, that's awesome. You should be thinking, on turn 2, turn 3, where is that 6 move going to come from? All right, there's all these blues over here. How can I move it 6 links, by the time I get to turn 5 or turn 6? You really need to be thinking that far in the future. And if that doesn't seem like fun to you, then Age of Steam may not be your game.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I also found it, I want to circle back to what you said earlier, which I found just hilarious because that whole maple shove thing, I believe you're calling it. First of all, let me say I'm shocked because I thought all Canadians were very nice. Every Canadian I have met has been very nice.
They are terrible, horrible. They pretend to be nice, but have you ever played games with Canadians? You haven't, have you?
Once, yes. I played once a game with a couple of people who are from Canada, and they seem very nice. Yes, they
seem that.
They still seem very nice. They beat me, but they weren't like mean about it or anything. But so you're really kind of opening my eyes to our neighbors to the north there. I really believe that they were as nice as advertised.
Be wary. Beware.
Okay. The other thing, other than, of course, that news, which kind of shocked me, that whole idea of that shove, of intentionally putting someone up above that band, I haven't played this enough. That never occurred to me. And so that's really something that's just fascinating to me because, as you said, we talk about games that are kind of emergent, and that kind of idea, that sort of strategy is really kind of fascinating, and it sounds like a lot of fun because it would make people angry, and so I think that sounds like that could be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
The kind of group you're looking for. I've had more fun playing this game than I think just about any game, maybe Magic, but just an overall level of fun. I've had the most fun playing Age of Steam because, you get together with a group of people who want to be competitive, but still do it in a good spirit. And what tends to occur, one of the great things about Age of Steam is playing it in a series of 3 or 4 games, because when metagaming starts to occur in the game, that starts to be a beautiful thing. Someone remembers that, oh, you hammered me in the last game, or you stole my cube last time, or you took me out of the game, so here's this. Like, there's so much interaction of, all right, am I going to take that cube for you, or am I going to take the cube from you? If you play it with the same group over and over and over again, the rewards you're going to reap are just going to be amazing. I think you'll have a great time. Now, let me clarify. I really strongly feel that if you can get 5, you want to have 5. 5 is the magical number with this game. I've tried it in earlier days. You can do it with 2. There's maps for 2. There's even maps for 1. There's 3. 4 is okay. I kind of like 6. 6 is kind of a crazy, wacky, wild affair where it's like, there's only 6 turns and, everything disappears really fast. And you kind of got to get a little lucky to win. But 5 is the magic number. If you can play it with 5 on a consistent basis, you get a group of 4 other people, a group of 5, and you play it. Say, we're going to play this, 4 times. And, what we do is something like, actually, I'll tell you, when you win a game, winner gets 5, second place gets 3, third place 2, fourth place 1, loser gets 0. And then you just, you keep that going after a number of games, say, all right, we're going to play to 4 games. And the emergence that happens, then you've got metagame and you got, okay, Kevin is in the lead, so we can't let him win again. It leads to a great experience.
Well, that definitely sounds like fun, because you're running it basically as a tournament, but not single game elimination, which, like you said, leads to a whole bunch of metagaming, which can be quite a lot of fun. Most of my plays have been 4-player and a couple 5-player, and I liked it at both counts, but I don't know that I would like it with 6 because of the shortened number of turns. I like to have a little bit more time to kind of develop my plans, and so I haven't tried that yet, so I will definitely give it a shot since you're saying you think it's enjoyable, if a little more unpredictable.
Yeah, you got to have the right map. But my feeling is that the game, 2 things. The auction. It's not good to have 4 because then if you even get last, you can get, you're not real familiar with the game. There's 7 special actions, and they're not of equal value. And the order in which you win the auction, you get to choose a special action. And the nice thing about 5 is if you end up, 4th or 5th, you're probably not getting anything useful, especially not at 5th. In a 4-player game, you can get last in the auction and be like, oh, look, that's just what I wanted. And that's no fun. Nobody wants that. But the other thing I find is that the game, it demeans from the importance of that auction, especially, the number of times you get loco or urbanize is just a little too easy to get. But also that crescendo that happens in this game, I find the crescendo happens at turn 6. And so the 6-player game kind of works because it just kind of ends right when you hit that crescendo. The 5-player kind of lets you build on that crescendo a little bit. With 4-player, then it goes to 8 turns, and it feels like it's crescendoed too long. It gets to turn 6, and you're like, we have 2 more turns? Like, what am I going to do? It feels like it's a little too long, and it was a little too easy to get the things that you need. Given the right map, it's still good. I'll still play 4-player Age of Steam all the time. Probably even before 6. I would say, 5 players best, then 4-player, then 6-player, and then find a different game.
All right. I have one question that I want to ask you about the game that's been on my mind since I started playing it, which is, okay, you have Age of Steam, which is a very interactive game, high strategy. You're looking ahead. You're looking into the future, a lot of long-term planning. And there's also what I call the expanding view, right? There are games I've played, like another one that I can think of that really mirrors this concept is Carl Chudik's Innovation. The first time you play that game, you are just staring at the cards in front of you because that's really all you can encompass. That's all your mind can kind of comprehend. After you play the game a few times, your field of view starts to expand. And you start to be able to really look at those other players, and you start to think about, as you described, what do I think they want to do? Where do I think they're going? What move would I make if I were them? And you described that beautifully when you were talking about how a good player is looking at the other players at the table as much, if not more, than themselves in order to figure out how people are going to value things. So you have this great game of a lot of strategy, even metagaming, and then you have this weird kind of goods growth kind of a thing. I almost kind of prefer the goods growth in Steam, where I can see, like, I actually have some control over that. I can say, aha, this set of cubes here is very valuable to me and it's very valuable to Joanna. So I'm going to bid, because if I can plop these cubes in this city, okay, to repopulate it, to make more deliveries, that's going to get, I can see this is going to lead me to this and this and this. And it's really going to set me up for like the next 2-3 turns. Whereas in Age of Steam, you have this kind of interesting sort of randomness where, you're actually chucking dice, and, you can be desperate to have, like the Sea City, the Sea City kind of repopulated, and it's not going to get anything because of the dice roll. So how would you defend that level of randomness in a game that is so much about strategy?
I think that it is input randomness rather than output randomness. It also is not as random as you think. The way that I see it is that in Age of Steam, you've got all these cubes. What is it? Something like 18, 30, 50, something like 50 cubes out there. And the dice are rolled. So if you're playing a 5-player game, you're going to roll 5 dice each turn for both sides. And at the end of the game, usually there's between 5 and 10 cubes left on that board. So looking at it, you know that almost all of those cubes are going to come out. It's just a matter of when they're going to come out. And the randomness is actually pretty low. If you look at, okay, there's 2 yellow cubes on the top of city A. Those are going to come out. And they're probably going to, and one of them's probably going to come out in the first 4 turns. And the odds of that coming out are very high. The other point about, like, okay, I need that blue cube to come out from City 5. If you need 1 cube to come out from City 5, then and if it doesn't happen, then you're really screwed. Then you have made a terrible mistake. One of the things I say about this game is, like, if you need one thing to happen in Age of Steam, you have completely failed. You need to have backups and backups to your backups. Ideally,
right.
When I play Age of Steam, I play what's on the board. I don't even think what's going to happen over there. And if something pops up, like, oh, okay, great. There's another cube there for me. I play what's in front of me and maybe what's on the top line, and things will come out. Very rarely, I would say, in a game, and I think never have I been like, oh, if a 4 would have been rolled, I would have won that game. I don't think I've ever said that in Age of Steam. Just the way the number of dice you roll so many, and as well as, you don't have to count on a cube coming out from the board. There's all those cubes on the board that you can play with, that you can make your plans towards, and then, hope for, okay, 2 turns in the road, I'll probably have this red cube, so I'm going to build for it, and it should be there. And 99.9% of the time, it shows up.
So basically what you're telling me is I'm a bad player.
I didn't say that. Did I say that?
Well,
how many times you played the game there, Jeff?
I've played it, I'd have to look, probably 4 or 5 times. Okay. I haven't played it a whole lot.
You got 30 or 40 more plays to go.
Okay.
To go.
All right. Well, I've already learned things from you, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about it. But I see your point about,
statistically speaking, most of that stuff is going to come out, and you're absolutely right. I mean, looking back through my memory, the board was pretty vacant by the end of the game. I mean, most of those cubes came out. I think it was just the being used to Steam and the way that you can plan for repopulating a city so that a network that you've already built can continue to be productive for you. You can't always depend on that in Age of Steam. You can literally kind of empty things. And so that's something that for you, from listening to you talk, that's a tension point. That's something that you have to work around. That's something that is part of the challenge and something that is part of the joy of the game. For me, it was something that was a little bit punishing. It was something that was a little bit brutal. I kind of felt like, man, I'm looking at this cube. It's the first one. If that thing comes out, that's going to give me a 6 delivery. I'm just waiting for it. And sure, I can try to build somewhere else and try to do something, but it's not going to be as efficient. And a lot of times, at least in my mind, I'm trying to figure out how to do things as efficiently as possible, the biggest bang for the buck kind of move, so that, to me, that equals success. And sometimes some of these other kind of things that you'll build, it's like, I'm going to spend all this money to get this track built over here, which is going to now give me access to this, blue cube, but I'm only going to get 3 for it. And so is it really even worth the money for me to do that? Or should I just, do something else? And so, that is certainly a decision point. But I kind of found myself being a little frustrated by the goods growth phase, because it just seemed like the things weren't coming out. I didn't have the control. You know what I'm saying? I didn't have the control that I had in Steam. So I think, you're absolutely right. I need to play it more. But that was something that I think, as a new player, that's something that I think is going to strike a lot of people, because I think a lot of people are going to look at some of these things that I'm talking about, and it's going to strike them as a little odd as well. You're saying in the long haul, it really doesn't make that big of a difference. That, one delivery of 5 or 6 is not necessarily going to win you or lose you the game. And because of how victory points are structured, I guess I can see that. But I still kind of, that efficiency question I'm talking about would be the next thing I would be asking you about. Is it not better to hang on to your money than make a little delivery of 3? You know what I mean? You're not getting points necessarily for the amount of goods that you've delivered, kind of thing. If I'm remembering correctly, I think that's Railways of the World, that you get sets of cubes or what have you, and you end up getting bonuses for that. Isn't that efficiency important in this game?
Yes, but I'm not suggesting that if you make a lower delivery that's not going to hurt you. What I'm more suggesting is that instead of planning for this cube that's on, city A, that you need a 1 to be rolled, you say, okay, if that comes out, that would be nice. Or there's a red cube over here at this city that's already on the board. I'm going to plan, on turn 1 to start building my network, so I know, all right, this is my corner. These are going to be my 5 moves. I'm planning, my 4s and my 5s, even sometimes my 6s. I see a pile of yellows and I say, okay, where could those yellows go on turn 1? And I'm not, I might look on the board and I might look for clumps of those, but when I'm planning my strategy turn to turn, I'm mostly depending on the cubes that are currently on the board. And when those things come out on the map, I don't know when they're going to come out, but when they do come out, then I start to account for them in my strategy. I rarely even worry about them or depend on them. I mainly just play the board. And you use 2 words to describe Age of Steam, which these adjectives are absolutely perfect, and those are punishing and brutal. And that's the thing I love about Age of Steam. I mean, Jeff, you could, it's like going to Disney World. You can buy that fast pass. You can spend $50 and go straight to the head of the line and get your little blue cube and take it for the ride. But isn't more delicious if you wait through the 3-hour line and the sweat with the tattoo ladies and the tattoo couple making out and the little girl crying? And isn't it better that way? I think it is.
I have never gone to Disney for precisely that reason, so I couldn't tell you. But yeah, no, I mean, I understand the point you're making. In all seriousness, that's sort of that. It means something when you accomplish it, and as teachers, we talk about that all the time. If everybody in my class is getting an A, if things are too easy, then I'm not really doing my job. Like getting that A should be an accomplishment. It should be something that you had to work for. It should be something that is above and beyond, not just, hey, you did what you're supposed to do. Here's an A. You did the easy delivery. Here you go. You win. It should be something that you work for if you're really going to do something exceptional. So I do get what you're saying. Despite the disturbing images you've put in my mind of tattooed people making out and crying children.
It's all real memories from my brain. Yep.
Thanks for sharing that.
You mentioned one of the other things I wanted to talk about was and this is something that I've run into with a lot of games that are a little bit older, from earlier in sort of this renaissance of board gaming. When you look at the rule book for Age of Steam, it is a very small, concise set of rules, I'm not going to necessarily say it's elegant because there are fiddly parts. I've already talked about some of the fiddly parts that I'm not a huge fan of yet, that I'm curious about, that you've helped me kind of understand a little better and explored them with me. But I am struck by the fact that, the rule book is quite small, quite clear. It's a straightforward game. The complexity is not in the rule set. The complexity is in the gameplay. And I find that a lot of games that I've looked at that really sort of stand the test of time, games that I continue to go back to, games like El Grande, these older games, when you have a game, even a game like Carcassonne or something like that, the complexity in the game is not in the rules, it's in the gameplay. The fun is in the gameplay. It's not in the systems that make the game. And I'm just kind of curious as to whether or not, you find that to be true, because Age of Steam is this very sort of prolific branch of the train game sort of world. Because we're not only talking about Age of Steam, we're talking about everything that followed, all of the expansions, the myriad numbers of expansions. And then you have 18xx. Which is this whole other sort of branch of the tree. And that is an incredibly complex. I just played my first real 18xx game with Eric Brocious. He was nice enough to teach me. Great guy. We played, I believe it was 1846. And I enjoyed the game, but man, I was swimming. I couldn't even really wrap my mind around everything that was going on. Whereas when I played Age of Steam, hey, I might not have played it super well. You've already pointed out a couple of things that maybe I could have done or should have done or what have you. But at least I was able to approach the game. You know what I mean? And so I wonder if one of the reasons this game is so successful is the fact that the complexity is not in a ton of rules and exceptions and little niggling details. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think you and I are sort of on the same page from our podcast's works, is that we like to dive into great games. And I've preached that for a long time on the podcast. And, I've sort of wound down how to play, but I'm still really proud of having that website there. For anyone new to the hobby, I think that, the 40 or so games that I've chosen, you talked about the games that disappear and the games that have longevity. I always made it a point to say, all right, I'm going to pick games that I love and games that I think that people are going to want to play over and over again, because I want this work to hold value over time. And I think it still does that. You look at some of those games on there. Age of Steam is on there, 18xx, Twilight Struggle, Brass, Through the Ages, Tigris, all of these games that when the sand comes in and the sand leaves, these games are still there, tide after tide. And, Age of Steam is definitely one of those games. You're right. I am always surprised when I pick up the Age of Steam rulebook. It is so light, and it's white and black. How many rule books in the last 15 years are it looks like it was photocopied on it's just black and white, and it's got Times New Roman font, and it's just very straightforward. That's part of the beauty of Age of Steam is the simplicity. We talked about Railroad Tycoon with its jaw-dropping plastic miniatures and gigantic board. And Age of Steam, when it's set up on the board, it looks like nothing. It looks like some kind of, I don't know, abstract puzzle. It might be a jigsaw puzzle. Who knows what the heck's going on there? It certainly doesn't look like, growing trains on the board. But when you're involved and you're invested in the game, I mean, it's great. And the functionality of just those simple pieces, they're just green, especially the first edition. You just got green tiles. That's all we need. Back in the days, we didn't have no fancy trees or lakes on these tiles. They're just green. And it works. When I first got Age of Steam, I said, hey, I got these great fancy plastic train tokens. Why would I use these wooden discs when I can, replace those with the plastic tokens that came in Railroad Tycoon? We can use those, and I'll just kind of make it look a little more thematic. And after like 30 minutes, I was like, this is crazy. I can't see any of the track. Give me my wooden discs back. And I've never gone back to those again. I mean, just the functionality of those and the functionality of the whole package and just the essentials of the rules. You're right. It's got a few interesting rough edges, but for the most part, I had the fortune of talking to Martin Wallace, and the impetus for that design, he played 1856, and he said, this is a pretty fun game, but it would have been more fun if it was 3 hours shorter. So that was the basic idea, was he wanted to give something with that feel that was approachable and that could be played in an evening. And, he did a marvelous job. And the thing, as you said, is not only did he create a great game, he created a category of game. He created a system. He created a branch in the wonderful train game mythos. And Age of Steam will forever have, one branch. I mean, he created just almost like a new genre, which is always something that's amazing to me. My game design heroes of Richard Garfield and Gary Gygax have created, like, this is a new kind of game. If you can do that and have people want to say, hey, I can improve on that system, and I can add more to this, and I can create this variation, and here's this spin on the game, then you've done something pretty amazing.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And I can think of a few modern equivalents as well. You look at, the sort of Dominion engine and how that has been sort of used and turned into so many other games, that with a very simple notion of, what if building the deck kind of was the game? That's kind of a little bit of a paradigm shift. I think about Pandemic. This is a game. I actually have an episode that I recorded. I have to do a little bit of post-production work on it. We had some recording issues, unfortunately, but that game to me was a groundbreaking game as well, because, as you said, it's like a system. The whole AI system of Pandemic is really a thing of beauty. The way that works, the way that scales for the number of players, almost automatically, without a bunch of rules overhead, without a lot of added complexity. These are the kinds of things that you're talking about, and that I'm talking about, that are kind of those groundbreakers. They're sort of the starts of new branches in gaming, and it's always something amazing to see and dive into. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting more plays of Age of Steam. And although I do disagree with you, I like my plastic trains. So I'm going to keep my plastic trains.
I can't see the track. Where's that track going? Move that darn train.
Track goes. No, I know where that's going. That's going right over there where I'm going to make money. Now I'm going to make it rain with that track.
Well, you got to have the base system that it starts with. And, a few of the other things that I love that are tied into it is the importance of geography. And just what I love about train games in general is that geography matters. And when you put it in a different country, like, okay, now we're playing in China. And
right.
What is that going to be like? And adding thematic rules, or now we're playing in Mexico, or I think the South America one is whenever you go through the capital of South America, you have to pay El Presidente $1. It lends itself to the corruption of whatever's going on there. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that expandability,
sure,
if you don't mind, because, obviously we can't talk about all of the
expansions, but it does speak to what we were just discussing, which is this: when you develop something that is so kind of innovative and so exciting, people want to take it and run with it. They instantly become creative themselves, you know, and I find that real kind of works of genius or works of art, and I think that board games are definitely a type of art in their design and their conception. It inspires people, you know, and people want to, you know, like the next, when you think about Caylus, right? Caylus kind of really set a whole sort of genre. And people were inspired by it and wanted to dig into it and try different things with it. And so you have this whole proliferation of these kind of worker placement games, but worker placement games that were viciously interactive, you know, the way Caylus is, you know, where you really can mess with people in that game. That is not a kind, gentle game. That is a mean game. And so that was something that I think inspired a lot of people. Clearly, Age of Steam has inspired a lot of people. And it has inspired them not just from a game standpoint, but I think also from a regional pride standpoint. I mean, I know that there's been an Age of Steam expansion, for example, that has everything to do with Pennsylvania and coal, which is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I mean, I have family members who were coal miners, you know? And so when I saw that there was an Age of Steam expansion that was put out that was Pennsylvania, and it had to do with, you know, that whole region and coal and moving it, I was like, oh, you know, I got to check that out now that I finally have Age of Steam. So there's all this creativity that flows from the original idea. What would you have to say about the expansions in general, you know? Because nowadays, a lot of expansions seem to be needed. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, well, the expansion makes the game so much better, man. And I worry that a lot of times the expansion is kind of fixing the game, almost like they're finishing the game, and I kind of wish they had finished the game before they published it in the first place. Whereas Age of Steam, I could probably see playing this game for a long time without ever adding an expansion, and it would still be interesting. But the expansions offer all of this other kind of these other options, these other creative ways to explore that kind of system. So what are your thoughts on that? Are the expansions like needed or necessary, or are they just an expression of more creativity or regional pride?
Well, let's start with the map that comes in the box, the Rust Belt map that was originally designed by Martin Wallace and started it all, that comes in there. That map is fantastic. You could never purchase another Age of Steam map, and you could play the map that comes in the box 100 times and experience all of that joy that I've been expressing if you know you like the same sort of games that I do, because it's got choke points, the way the colors are set up. I mean, it's just the replayability comes from, you've got, you know, a different cube distribution every time, and, you know, of course, the choices of the players every time. You know, is are people gonna bid high? Are a lot of people gonna go try to get through Chicago? What's gonna happen in the Toronto area over there? I happily sit down and play the Rust Belt again. So, you know, you have that, but then to go further, you've got a lot of great fun things to explore if you like that. You know, we was talking about that league. There's a little bit of a discussion on the league of, you know, should we only do the Rust Belt, or should we do maps that we've played a couple times? Part of the fun of that is, you know, is that discovery of playing that new map that you haven't played before. They are sort of all over the place. If you're interested in this, I would recommend doing some research. The number one thing that's great about these maps is honing the game for number of players. I groused a little bit about 4-player, 5-player, 6-player. Whatever number you have, you know, if you have 10 maps, you can pick a map that's going to be tight enough and that's going to make that experience much better. If you play with a wide open map, there's some of the maps, say India. If you play that with 4 players, it's huge, it's enormous, and the tension of the game is going to be totally lost. So you're improving the experience in that way. You know, the Rust Belt works with 4 or 5, but there's some maps that are great with 4, great for 5. Or if you want to try those other wacky player counts, you know, if there's some good maps for 3, you miss some elements of the game. There's even some maps for 7. I wouldn't really recommend that. That's sort of you know, hardcore users only. But it's nice. It lets you hone in on that player count. But also the piece that you mentioned about the exploring of the history. I love it when they add one little rule that says something about the history of that region. You mentioned that 1830s PA map by Ted Alsbach. That's a great map. It's a lot of fun because that coal changes the game. And that's what's lovely about these is you can't just play the Age of Steam basis and you have to play the rules, because whenever you add that one change, and it's so fun to see how does that one change affect the entire system. And you usually don't grok that about halfway through your first play of that map. And then you're like, oh, that's what we were supposed to be doing this whole time. And I think that's what drives people to say, all right, I want to play this map I haven't played yet, because they want to have that experience of like, oh, that's how that works in the system, and seeing how things fit in the system. And these designers have gotten great in adding these little tweaks. But if you're going to dive into the different maps, there's a lot of great resources to you. I would point you to, and I'll give you the link. There is a Google spreadsheet that some users have combined to create. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't.
You haven't seen it? It has like every Age of Steam map ever. I'm in fact looking at it right now. It's 150 maps or whatever. And they've kind of came together and they rate it. They've got all the information. They've got a rating by player, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it says plus, minus, double plus, triple plus. Has the designer, has the publisher, has the year published, all this other stuff you don't really need to know. But the rating per player it is a very useful thing, and you can look at that if you want. I mean, I could tell you, if you are diving into Age of Steam, you're new to Age of Steam, here's some of them are starting to get hard to find. Some of them are starting to get like, okay, they're $10 now, because it seems like kind of the Age of Steam fever is passing a little bit, but those hardcore people that know how great the game are snatching them up, especially the great maps. But if you are looking to dive into it, step one, the first expansion, England and Ireland, they made available as a print and play. It's out of print, but you can go to Board Game Geek and you can print out 4 sheets of paper, put it together, put your Plexi on it. 2 of the greatest maps you can own. I mean, between Rust Belt and that print and play, you could be good to go for a long, long time. England is 5.6, Ireland is 3.4. Then Eagle Games has recently put out a bunch of double sets of, like, they've kind of handpicked some of the best, like, small print run expansions that were out there. My number one recommendation is to find Mexico and China. China is just brutally hard, awesome map. One of my favorite maps ever. And Mexico is a little nicer and friendly. There's Germany and France is a good one as well. And then, if you can find Scandinavian Korea, one of the original maps, but they made a bunch of them, so it's not too hard to find. I think they also made South Africa and South America. That's a nice, friendlier one. If you're looking for one that's not too brutal or mean, I would check that one out. And then you got to look for like the fun, gimmicky, weird stuff. If you really want to go gimmicky and weird, you should get the Zombie Apocalypse Age of Steam. Do you know about this one?
No,
it sounds like, okay,
no.
That sounds like the worst idea ever. Like, let's take an
does.
Ameritrash game and let's make Age of Steam an Ameritrash game, but it doesn't do that at all. You put some zombies on the map and there's programmed movement for they're going to go to the nearest cube and eat it and make it disappear. But the players, what you figure out is that if you move some cubes away, you can kind of control how the zombies move. So it's way more controlled than you would think, and it's a very strategic, awesome map. So there's just such a wide range of crazy stuff. You can get the moon. Once you dive into it, if you find a group that wants to dive into it, it's just fantastic. You can either get a couple and like really hone in on them and get good at them, or what we did for a long time was like, okay, what's the newest map you bought? Let's play it. And now they're getting a lot cheaper than they used to be. It used to be like $40 a shot for these things.
Well, thank you for that advice and those tips, because, when you look at the list of Age of Steam maps that are there, it's really rather daunting, and that document that you referred to really proves that. I mean, there's so many expansions, and it would be hard to know where to begin. So I appreciate you sharing that insight about the maps of that are your personal favorites. But also, I'm really looking forward to being able to share that link to that Google Doc, if that's at all possible, so that people can kind of go and tailor the maps that they might want to try and shoot for or go for based on the number of players that they usually have.
Sure. Or the personal preference thing. You said, hey, I live in Pennsylvania. There's a Pennsylvania map. How cool. I used to live in New Hampshire. I was like, oh, I'm buying the New Hampshire map because, like, hey, I lived in Conway, and Conway is on the map. I am building to Conway. I don't care if it's strategically appropriate. I am going to move a cube to Conway. That's just the way it's going to be.
That's going to happen. That's fantastic. Well, I appreciate you, taking the time to sort of share your strategic insights. I will also try and put a show note in there pointing to your earlier episodes of your own podcast that were the sort of those 2 hours of in-depth discussion with Ted about Age of Steam, because I think people, if they haven't heard that yet, I think it would be something that would be great for them to listen to get even more information about the game. I think it's very clear that the design has certainly stood the test of time. I mean, there's no way to kind of get around that. I mean, it's very obvious at this point. It's obvious because it's still in print. I just got my copy from Eagle Griffin, who has a brand new edition that they printed out. I mean, what are they up to? Like 4th, 5th edition, something by now? This game has been around for a long time. And then the proliferation of all of the different expansions speaks to its popularity and enduring sort of regard as well. I'm going to ask you, though, is there anything about this game that you don't like, or that you wish was a little different? Or is there perhaps, if I can't pin you down on that, is there perhaps an expansion that adds a kind of element or a rule that you kind of wish was there in more of the sort of Age of Steam maps and game situations?
Sure. Yeah, I can for sure speak to that first point. I'll think about that second one's kind of the thinker. What I don't like, I actually put a post up about this at Board Game Geek. Here is my one problem with this game, is that this game can be very tightly contested. It can get, really heated, where there's, 3 people fighting for the finish, and it gets to that last turn of who's going to move what where, who's going to get a 6, who's going to get a 3, who's going to move what cube. And it can come to a point where you're playing, like I said, it's great with 5, but here's the problem. And you get to that last turn, and you have the situation with the player who just had a rough game, and they're in last place by a mile, and they have to make a decision of, okay, I can't move a 5. I can move 3 on me and 2 for Rob, or 2 for Ryan. And then hence ensues a 24-minute shouting match about why they should move for Ryan, or why they should move for Rob, or maybe they shouldn't move any at all. And these kingmaker situations aren't uncommon. In fact, I think they happen much more often than I would like. Maybe 1 in 3, 1 in 4 games where it's not clearly kingmaking, but a player moved a cube, and if they hadn't moved that cube, it would have changed the results. That's why I like this game. And in a series of games, you get kind of that metagaming where people know who's ahead, who's not ahead. It's just a tough situation. I mean, for me, if I was in that situation, I would say, all right, I'm just not going to move the cube for anybody. I'm just going to move a cube for 1. Like, I don't need to move a cube for 3. It doesn't matter at this point. But then people say, oh, you got to make the best move for you, the move that gives you the highest score. So it's that can be a tough situation. And the one problem, one thing that I don't like that can come up in the games. One thing that a rule in a Age of Steam expansion that I would like to see in more. I think just overall, I really prefer the game to be tight. If it ever occurs that like someone's making money on turn 2, I'm like, why? This is not Age of Steam. Why? What are we doing? How are you making money on turn 2? This is not right. Ways that can occur is if there's like bonuses, or it gives you bonus income for some reason, a lot of cheap land. There's something wrong with the map, or something goofy with the rules. That's one of the things I love about China. Talk about one rule I might put into others is everybody starts on these exterior cities, and if you want to build into an interior city, they're China, they resist change. You have to pay an amount of money equal to the number on the tile. So in order to build into an interior city, you have to pay an additional $1 to $6, and that adds the cash tension that I crave. So that, anything that keeps the money tight, that's what I like. If there's ever too much money, if players are all making money on turn 3, then it's just like, this isn't a proper game, I guess.
So you really need that tension, is what it sounds like, because that's what you started with.
You missed the narrative. The whole thing is the narrative. Yeah. If there's no narrative, and that's where that Steam dividing line is. If I don't have that excitement point of now I'm making money, then I miss a huge part of that game.
I would argue, though, that the tension point in Steam is there. It's just, it is muted. I will grant you that. I mean, I haven't played Age of Steam a ton yet, but I can see that it's definitely muted in Steam. The tension is a little muted. But with Steam, I will say that I find the tension is in the decision about mid-game. When do I start going for income and when do I start going for victory points? Because you do spend the good, I'd say, first third of the game usually in debt or just kind of floating around 0, -1, +2, as far as your income goes. And then you finally things start to loosen up. You start to make some big deliveries. And then it's like, okay, do I take this as income so that I can do this cool opportunity that I see here on the board? Or do I go for the sort of long term? Do I go for the victory points? And I like that. I mean, that to me is where the tension point in the game is that cash victory point conversion step that is in Steam that, I don't really see. It's not overtly there as it is in Age of Steam. Now, in Age of Steam, you do have to realize that cash on hand is great, but it's not. I don't know that I consider that to be as valuable as having issued fewer shares. Maybe that's my inexperience showing again, but to me, losing that 3 victory points per share that I've issued is really a bit of a hammer blow at the end if you've been kind of fast and loose and careless with your shares. So I know that there's a little bit of a similarity there in the original Age of Steam, but it feels maybe a little more subtle in Age of Steam, whereas in Steam it's very overt. It's like, okay, now I'm switching gears. Now I'm going to go for victory points. Do you think there's any truth in that, or are you still not buying it?
Well, I'm a total Age of Steam geek and played it a million times. So I wanted to like that part of the game. I remember reading about that, like, oh, okay, so now there's this cool decision point of how much money do I take versus how much do I take in victory points. But in practice, I found that decision not to be that hard. Like, it's just, okay, I'm going to take the exact amount of money I need. Next turn, I need $8. So I'm going to, that's how much money I'm going to take. And then, now I've got plenty of money. So now I take it all in victory points. And I wanted that decision to be harder, but it's not as hard or interesting to me as the share decision in Age of Steam that you mentioned before. Do I need to go hard this turn? Do I need to take a lot of shares because I'm going to bid a lot, or is taking a lot of shares going to just put me in a bidding war and take me out of the game because there's no turning back from that?
No, not at all. Not at all. All right. Well, I was just curious what your reaction would be to that. Okay. So, I think we've covered a lot of really good ground, a lot of fertile ground here as far as Age of Steam goes and why you think it's such a great game. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you if there was anything else that you really wanted to talk about or mention or say about, your favorite game that we haven't had the chance to cover yet.
Well, I could say it, or I could let my friend Tom Vasel express it in a discotheque style song. Could we play that? Okay, take it away, Tom.
I'm Tom Vasel. I'm Tom Vasel. I'm standing for the people. I'm standing for the people. So I'm almost ready to cry. What Ryan said is true. Aha! Kick it off the roof, kick it off the roof, burn it. Kick it off the roof, kick it off the roof, burn it. I do love Age of Steam. I do love Age of Steam. I do love Age of Steam. Okay. I've been sitting here trying to think of a way I could argue with Ryan. What Ryan said is true. What Ryan said is true. I think Age of Steam has already pile drive Duel of Ages to the ground. I'm standing for the people. What Ryan said is true. I'm Tom Vassal. I don't know the best way to describe it because I fell asleep playing it. It's boring. And I literally did fall asleep during a game of this one time. Aha! I'm Tom Vassal. The Leatherjetic Experience. I'm Tom Vassal. Thanks so much.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you for also guesting on the show. It was an unexpected pleasure to have you telling us, sharing your true feelings about Age of Steam. And I'm really glad that, we got the chance to hear your thoughts about that, because so often I think people are used to hearing Ryan talking about how awesome this game is. And yet, he's kind of like the lone voice in the wilderness. And now we know that you love the game too. And so I really appreciate that. So thanks for that, Tom, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future. So Ryan, back to you.
He's going to make it big one day. So if you've never heard of Tom Vassal, he has a little podcast. So you might want to
just a small.
I'll give you his phone number. You can call him. He'll send you an email with a few episodes he's done.
And I think we might want to try and get him on The Voice. Or perhaps, a show like that. I mean, he might want to diversify and get more into a musical career, because his song at Gen Con was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. And, I think that this could be a whole new area for Tom to explore. And I, for one, would love to hear more.
We should have a podcaster-only voice. Like, it would just be, Vassal. But Eric couldn't come because he can actually sing. It would be Vassal and me and Engelstein and I don't know who else. You can come. Whoever else wants to join our podcaster-only voice event.
I think we need.
That would be great.
I think that would be fantastic, and I think that would be a real winner. I don't think we could get anybody to agree to it, but I think it would be fun. So here's hoping, we can make that happen in the future. I think that definitely sounds like a winner. Well, Ryan, thanks a lot for, sharing your thoughts about Age of Steam. I also wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a chance, though, because you've done such a great job in teaching me about Age of Steam and some of the finer points of the game, and you've done that for the community on your own podcast. But, I think there's a reason why you're so well known for your How to Play podcast and Ludology. And it has to do with the fact that you really are excellent at teaching. And I don't think that's really a coincidence, because if I'm not mistaken, your day job is as a teacher as well. And I know that you've been starting some new kind of exciting things. We talked about it before we started recording, some resources that you're developing. And I wanted to give you a chance to talk to people a little bit about that and share some of the things that you're working on, outside of the board gaming sort of main kind of, I don't want to say mainstream, but outside of the things that we already know you for. It's an incredibly awkward sentence, but I think you know where I'm going.
Yeah, certainly. It's been a dream of mine for a long time. I'm a classroom teacher, and I've always brought games into my teaching to get kids excited and engaged in their learning. And I've taken a lot of the games in our hobby and said, all right, how can I make this topic using this sort of game system? And I've had a lot of fun combining some of these things, and I'm thinking there's got to be some other teachers out there who want to do a role-playing game about Native Americans, or to make their colonial unit into like a giant game of Settlers of Catan, or to make their geography unit a Carmen Sandiego-like hunt for wacky criminals, or to make their civilization unit be like the actual board game Civilization. So these are all these great Ideas I've been working on, and I've got a lot of units that are nearly complete. I put one of them up there, is already up on my website. I finally have the website. The website is called engagedbyplay.com. Engaged with a D, byplay.com. You'll see that unit, a few of the other resources there. I hope to add to it over the next year. So if you know some teachers, specifically elementary classroom teachers, but other secondary social studies teachers might be interested in it as well, to come check this out. Or if you're just interested out of curiosity, check that out. And as always, I got a lot of other resources you can dive into if you never learned Age of Steam, something terrible has happened to you in the last 10 or 15 years. Maybe you're like Oliver Queen and you were stranded on an island for the last several years and been avoiding bandits, and you just came back. You should listen to my Age of Steam, How to Play Age of Steam on the howtoplaypodcast.com, or as you mentioned, the 2 episodes with Ted Alspach. Ted is a designer. He's designed many dozens of Age of Steam maps. It was great to talk to him. Or many episodes on Ludology. We actually talked to Martin Wallace, and of course I pressed him for a few questions about Age of Steam. I'm not sure what episode that is, episode number Martin Wallace, but if you're interested in that, check that out over at Ludology. I think we're kind of similarly thinking podcasts. We really dive into what makes games tick, looking at the history of the hobby, looking at how you design a game. So if you never checked that out, please head over there and see us there as well. But this has been a blast. Thanks, Jeff.
Not a problem at all. It's been a real pleasure, and I appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. It was an absolute blast. Thank you so much for having me.
And now it's time for a new game review. Join us for a quick look here on The Long View. At today is a brand new title from Stronghold Games. This is an expansion. It's a Core Worlds expansion called Revolution. This is a game designed by Andrew Parks and Sarah Sterfone. This is a co-design project here, and it's adding another piece to the Core Worlds universe. So Core Worlds Revolution is an expansion for Core Worlds, as I stated, and Core Worlds is set in this kind of distant future where sort of this great galactic empire has fallen apart, and all of the sort of local strong men and strong women out on the fringe of the galaxy have kind of seen an opportunity, and so they work their way from the fringes of the galaxy towards the galactic core, getting ready to conquer new worlds and sort of fill the power vacuum that's being left by the decaying, ancient order. So there's this kind of narrative from the original game. The next expansion was Core Worlds Galactic Orders, and what that added was it added this kind of guilds kind of an effect. So there's these galactic guilds, these galactic orders, and each of them sort of specializes in something. It could be knowledge, it could be military strength, it could be any number of kind of different areas. And basically what they do is they give you a place to put tokens for your particular faction, your sort of warlord that is trying to take over the galaxy, and those go on the board, and they're kind of like a currency. They can then be cashed in at a later time in the game in order to take some sort of a valuable effect. So, for example, the Merchant Alliance is one that allows you to take a token off of that board and subtract 3 from the deployment cost of a unit, for example. So this was kind of the new piece to the puzzle of galactic orders to the Core Worlds universe. And it added quite a few nice dimensions. It added this idea of a little bit more long-term planning and strategy by where you're placing these orders tokens, and gave you something else to think about when you were drafting cards from the center row, because you were often looking for cards that had these faction icons on them that were going to help you by adding those tokens to these galactic orders boards to give you more benefits. You could kind of have super turns, so it was really kind of a nifty expansion. In addition, it offered other new components and tweaks, new cards, things like home worlds, really interesting kind of stuff. Well, Revolution takes it the next step further. So it's the second kind of expansion for Core Worlds. And what it does is it's going to give a little bit more of everything. So you're going to have a lot of new cards. You're going to have new advancement cards. You're going to have new cards that are going to get shuffled right into the deck as well. It also includes a few replacement cards for the original base set, cards that, people were a little worried were unbalanced. And so new versions of those cards have been added. The biggest part of the expansion, however, at least in my opinion, is these heroic tactics. The heroic tactics are really, really interesting because what they do is they take each of the heroes in the game and they're going to then add something different that they can do. So basically the way the whole system works is that every time you deploy your hero from your deck, and everybody kind of has a hero in their deck if you remember from the base game. Every time you deploy a hero into your war zone, your hero card, you're going to have the option of drawing from a tiny little deck of 3 cards, and these are your heroic tactic cards. These are quite powerful. These are cards that are going to give you some sort of a really strong benefit, and they're often thematically tied, which is really nice, to the sort of base feel or abilities of the original. So, for example, here, if you take a look at Chancellor Augustus, when you deploy Augustus, you're going to get 3 energy tokens on him, and you can use those energy tokens to deploy infantry units. Now, that's the base Chancellor Augustus card. This is what Chancellor Augustus has always done. However, now we have these heroic tactics. So the first one we have is rigorous scheduling. At the start of your player turn, if Augustus is in your war zone and you have at least 1 action point, you gain an additional action point. Now, people who've played Core Worlds know just how incredibly valuable action points are. It really is kind of the heart of everything. You can't do anything without expending action points. Here's another one, hidden resources. As an action, if Augustus is in your war zone, gain 2 energy, and afterward gain an action point. So here you're getting more energy, more action points, which is what Augustus is all about. You have manipulation. After an invasion, you may discard Augustus and one other unit from your war zone to retain 1 infantry, vehicle, or robot used to conquer the planet. So if you have that card, that's going to allow you to kind of recycle your forces, which is very valuable. The Metabot, I believe, in the original core set of Core Worlds actually had that ability too. You can sort of discard that and keep a unit. So if you have that card plus this heroic tactic card, you're going to be able to retain 2 cards from your invasion force, and you're going to be able to really get yourself ramped up and geared up very quickly for the next world that is on your list. So, I could go on and on through all of these, but the bottom line is that each one of the heroes, and there's actually 3 new heroes that have been added to the Core Worlds universe that you're going to be able to play with. So all of these kind of new heroes and the old heroes now have these 3 heroic tactic cards, and they're tied in thematically to the original hero or to this new hero, whoever that happens to be. So really neat stuff being added here that opens up the opportunity for those sort of super turns. That's kind of the best way that I can think of to put it. Another example would be a brand new hero from the set called the Prophet. This is a hero that says when you deploy the Prophet, you may search your draw deck, reveal up to 2 tactic cards, and then place those cards in your hand and shuffle your draw deck afterwards. So the Prophet can kind of see into the future, because these tactic cards that are in the game are often cards that are going to help you plan. They're going to help you change one type of force, whether it's fleet power or ground troop strength. It's going to allow you to flip-flop them. It's going to allow you to get extra energy, things of that nature. So the Prophet can kind of see into the future. So, for example, the Prophet's heroic tactic, one of them is called Conversion. During an invasion involving the Prophet, examine one opponent's discard pile, use 1 unit from the pile in the invasion, and then return it. So you're going to be able to borrow a unit, basically for free from an opponent's discard pile and put it into your invasion force to help you conquer a new world. Another one's called Divine Intervention. As an action, discard the Prophet from your war zone to conquer 1 world in the central zone from sectors 2, 3, or 4. Holy moly. This is a card that's basically going to allow you to just take a world. I mean, how powerful is that? So really interesting stuff in these tactic cards. A lot of them are kind of I'm not going to say game changing, but they certainly are round changing. They're very, very powerful, very, very interesting. The second half of the expansion, and another part that I particularly enjoy, I have a little bit of a problem with it from a sort of logistical standpoint, but basically there are tons of new cards now called advancements. These advancements are cards that are going to come up in the Galactic Core kind of a deck. And so they're going to come up in the flop as you go through sectors 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And a certain number of these are going to be seeded into those decks. And when they come up, they're going to be kind of put into a separate pile of their own. And one of the things now that you can do is you can grab an advancement card from the top of that display. And the advancement cards are really interesting because what they're going to do is they're going to attach to a planet. And each planet can only have one. So, it's another reason to want to encourage people to go out there and try to grab worlds, because for every world you have, you're going to be able to have an attachment. So, for example, one of them is called, this is one of my favorites, Quantum Observatory. It says during the draw phase, you may draw one card. You must then immediately discard one card of your choice. Well, I love that because anybody who's played Core Worlds knows that, you're trying to get a certain card into your hand. Anything that allows you to drill down through your deck and cycle through your deck more quickly is going to be really helpful, because sometimes you need that one last card. You're looking for that hero card, you're looking for that vehicle card, and you pick a Galactic Grunt, and you're like, okay, man, I keep putting these guys underneath the planets that I'm conquering to garrison them, to thin my deck and get them out of my hand because I got better cards now, but I can't get rid of them all. And man, it can get frustrating in a good way, but it can get frustrating. So, any card like this that I can attach to a world, it's going to give me extra draws so that I can then get rid of cards and cycle through my deck faster, is a winner for me, right? So this advancement deck is really neat. It adds a lot to the game. And I also like the way in which, you gain the cards. So when an advancement card comes up, it's put on that advancement board, which is now part of the game setup. So you now have the Galactic Orders board and you have this advancement board. And every time an advancement card comes up, you put it on top of this stack of cards. And so if you want to take an advancement card on your turn, you can. You pay the energy cost, you take the card. If you want one of the ones that's further down, you can do that, but you're gonna, you can pick up the whole stack and look through it, but you're gonna pay extra energy for every card that that you have to drill down through. So if I want the third card from the top, I'm gonna have to pay 2 extra energy because I'm going past the first one, past the second one. So each one you pass, you're gonna basically have to spend an extra energy, and then of course the energy cost on the card itself. So this really adds some really neat things to the game, and it's something that I like because, again, it's fleshing things out. It's giving some differentiation, as I said, to the planets, and just like it's doing with the heroes with their Heroic Tactics cards and the Heroic Tactics deck. And while we're on the subject of the Heroic Tactics, I think it's also a really interesting choice that's baked in there that, you have this little 3-card deck. And so when you deploy your hero to your war zone, you can take the top card of that Heroic Tactics deck and you're going to be able to use it, right? However, if you acquire one of those other heroes, the new heroes that's kind of in the center row, when you acquire them, you have a choice. You can take the Heroic Tactic cards for that hero, and you can put it into your Heroic Tactics deck. So now you have like 6 cards in your Heroic Tactic deck, right? But here's the problem. If I deploy Chancellor Augustus, for example, and I go and say, okay, I want to draw the top card of my Heroic Tactics deck, and I draw it as Chancellor Augustus, awesome. If, however, I draw it and it belongs to one of the other heroes, I have to put it back. Like, I can't draw it. So you're kind of getting more powerful as you gain more Heroic Tactic cards, but you're also increasing the odds that you're not necessarily going to be able to use those powers. So I like that very simple, straightforward sort of cost-benefit thing that's going on there. If you stick with one hero and you stay real laser-focused, you're going to be able to use those cards, and there's not going to be any question. If you load up with a bunch of heroes and you take their Heroic Tactic cards, you don't have to, but if you do, then there's always that chance that you're not going to really be able to use those tactic cards that are so amazing because they're not going to match. So every time you deploy a hero to your war zone, whichever one it is, if the flip of that card does not match, even if that hero is already in your war zone, it has to be at the moment that you play it to your display. So that adds a lot of tension there, and it adds some decision points as to, do I take those cards? Do I not take those cards? Do I just take the hero the way I would have in the base game, or do I run the risk by taking the tactics card as well? So that really fleshes things out interestingly too. And again, each of those tactics cards kind of fleshes out the story. It's not just a name anymore. The action of the hero and then the tactics cards really kind of paint a little bit more of a complete picture, and that's something I appreciate. So is there anything negative that I have to say about this expansion at all? I do have one little sort of problem, and it's more of a logistics problem than anything else. Let me try to explain. When you gain an advancement card, you're going to take it and put it in your personal display where your planets are. So you're going to attach one of these to the world, and each of these advancement cards has like a little arrow, and it's supposed to point to the world that it belongs to. Okay, well, that's cool, but if anybody has played Core Worlds and played Core Worlds with the Galactic Orders expansion, the footprint for this game begins to get very, very large. You know, as the game goes on, you start accumulating more and more planets, working towards the Core Worlds, and you get a card like this, you know, this Quantum Observatory. Now you have to kind of have that card sort of stuck in next to your planet, but not overlapping your planet, because you still need to see the resources that your planet gives you every round. And so what it does is, from a sort of a logistical standpoint, I find it's a little difficult because, it's just more stuff, right? More things on the table. So I really like the idea of the advancement cards. I think they add a lot of flavor. They give you a little bit of a differentiation. It's not just a planet that produces energy now, right? Now you have a planet that has a hydroponic farm tower, or you have a planet that has a wormhole generator. I mean, how cool is that? There's like mining colonies and things of that nature. So there's all of these great kind of flavorful advancement cards that can be attached to a planet, which I really like. The only problem is, as I said, it can get a little bit kind of unwieldy on the table. I don't really know that there's a solution for it, though. I can't really fault the designer. I can't really fault Stronghold from production end of things. I don't know. There's really no way to make these things smaller. If you want to have any art on the card at all, and goodness knows the art in the Core World series is fantastic, you really can't cut the size of the card down. You can't cut the font down, because a lot of these advancements have a certain effect. And so I don't really know there's a solution. It's just going to take up a lot of table space. So just be aware of that. Make sure that, you have a good amount of space when you're playing this, because not only do you have your hero now, you don't only have your war zone, you don't only have the areas where you're going to keep all your planets, but now you have your separate heroic tactics deck, because remember, every time you deploy that hero, you have the option of being able to acquire a heroic tactic. There's going to be heroes now. There are heroic tactic cards for some of the heroes that are going to pop up in the central display, and so there's going to be there. Then you have a new board to go along with the Galactic Orders board that is going to be there for the advancement cards as they come up. So that's going to take up a little more space. So the footprint of the game is growing. Understand. I don't really know that I would qualify this even as like a card game anymore in some ways. There's so many parts and pieces to it. I don't have plastic ships flying around on a map, but man, I got a whole lot of other stuff, and it takes up a rather large amount of space. So a little nitpick there, but it's not even a nitpick, I guess, because I don't know what else they could have done. But I do know that the game has grown to the point where it's hard for me to fit on my standard kind of table. Beautiful game, though. Lots of really interesting bits. And then finally, you have the whole sort of backstory, which is these revolution tokens. And so the revolution tokens, there are going to be certain cards that kind of you mention these revolution tokens, and these are tokens that you're going to be able to put down. You're going to be able to put them down on a card. You're going to put them down wherever it tells you to, and then those tokens are going to be used to power other card effects, or they're going to be used to boost other card effects. So The Revolution tokens add a whole nother piece to the puzzle and a little bit more flavor. So as everything is kind of moving forward in this Core World story, now we have more fleshed out stories for all of the heroes. We have new heroes entering the kind of a galaxy here that we can learn about. And we have this growing sort of revolution, this growing movement here that can lead to all sorts of interesting new situations, all sorts of interesting new powers and effects and interactions, all the way up to and including the removal of worlds. So Core Worlds Revolution really adds a lot, I think, again, to the base game, to the whole system, and it does it from a sort of differentiation standpoint. You know, that's kind of the way I'm looking at this. I look at Galactic Orders as sort of a expansion that gave you more options for long-term planning and options for super turns is kind of the way I kind of sum up Galactic Orders. This one really is more about the narrative arc. It tells more of a story. It has more details about each of the heroes. It gives you the revolution aspect, which really adds to the kind of story of the game, the backstory and the evolving changes that are happening. And it also adds all of these advancements, which really kind of take the worlds that you've conquered and gives you something that you can kind of now imagine instead of it just being these sort of generic worlds. Well, this one's worth more points and this one produces one more energy but one less victory point, because that's kind of really all it was. You know, there were some worlds that had some interesting little powers that went with them, draw powers or things of that nature, but for the most part, it's about energy and victory points, you know, so you kind of did your calculations. You say, okay, can I take over that world? Well, now the worlds kind of have like a little story of their own, you know, because each world, you know, there might be an asteroid mine attached to it, or that quantum observatory, or, you know, that hydroponic farm, or maybe there's terraforming going on that world, or, you know, maybe there's an atmospheric distorter. I mean, there's so many different things now that can be attached, these technologies and these advancements to these worlds, that it really kind of gives you a lot more flavor and detail. So for me, Core Worlds Revolution is a great expansion because it adds all of those elements with very little rules overhead. I mean, basically, you have a little board and you have a very simple set of rules for how to use and play advancements. You have your heroic tactics decks, which sound kind of silly when you first look at them. You're like, it's 3 cards. How is that even a deck? You know, that's like a hand. It's not a deck. But it becomes a deck because as you take new heroes, you know, you can choose to add cards to that deck, and it kind of functions off to the side on its own. So the rules aren't real complicated again, but it offers you a whole lot more options and more details and things that you can consider when you're trying to plan out your strategy for Core World. So to me, there's a lot of bang for the buck in this expansion because it adds all of these things with low rules overhead, and that's something that I really appreciate. It doesn't add a ton of new things for me to have to, fiddly things for me to have to deal with. Everything is really straightforward. Everything is an additive factor. There's nothing really that I can see that takes away from the experience. There's nothing that I would choose to keep out of it. You know, I wish that things were a little bit smaller. I could fit them on my table better. But other than that, there's really nothing that I wouldn't want to have in there. So I know a lot of times for me with expansions, I always ask the question, would I rather just play the base game? Is the expansion just bloat? Is it just more for the sake of more? And one of the things that I respect about what Andrew Parks has done here is that each expansion, rather than simply, you know, offering more cards for the players to look at, more cool new machines or robots or technologies or tactics, there's new kind of things that are added in that flesh out the story, flesh out the universe, and do so with a minimum of rules overhead, which I really appreciate. Sometimes when you start adding in expansions, the rules get very unwieldy and overwhelming, and you just kind of like, you know, I just want to play the simple basic. Well, with this one, since you don't have that problem, there's no reason not to play with it. You know, there's no reason to not do it. It really is just all adding. It's increasing and enhancing the experience. So Core Worlds Revolution is a great expansion for a really solid and enjoyable game. So the last game I want to talk about today is a new game from NSKN Games. It's called Progress Evolution of Technology. So this title really intrigued me because it asked a very basic question. And that question was, what if you took everything out of a Civ game except the tech tree and made the tech tree the game? And when I heard about that and sort of saw what they were trying to do, it really intrigued me because to me, in many ways, that's what Dominion did. Dominion said, what if the entire game was building your deck instead of having a deck and building it in advance and then having all of these rules and systems like in Magic the Gathering and having these duels and finding out who wins? What if building the deck was the game? So when I think about Civilization games, one of my absolute favorite parts of it is the tech tree. Whether we're talking about the original game, Civilization, whether we're talking about the newer version, Sid Meier's Civilization, Clash of Cultures, whatever the game is, technology development is one of the things that really draws me to Civilization games. I absolutely love that part of it. So when I saw this, I thought, okay, this really sounds like a fascinating idea because it's taking my favorite part of a game and making it the game. So the question in my mind was, is it going to work? There were two sort of Civilization games that were being kickstarted at roughly the same time. One of them was called Historia, and the other was this Progress, Evolution of Technology. And so I took a look at both of them, and quite frankly, fair or not, I haven't played the game, so I don't know, but Historia looked like a spreadsheet to me with these kind of tracks and charts and things. I was like, I don't know. And there was this very little abstracted little map off to the side, and I'm like, I don't know. And then I looked at Progress. And Progress had some of the best art I'd ever seen. I mean, the art for the cards looked absolutely phenomenal. I kept coming back to that basic question, though, which is if my favorite part of Civilization games, or one of my favorite parts, is the tech tree, maybe that's the one I want to go for. And that's the one, quite frankly, that sounded very different to me. So I decided to back Progress. And there's a couple of things I want to say about that. First of all, one of the things that attracted me to backing the game was the artwork. The artwork for the game, in my opinion, is just spectacular. The sample art that was up there, the cards that I saw were just absolutely gorgeous. I was just like, man, I haven't seen art this nice in ages on cards. And they really kind of reminded me of the beautiful art on the Seven Wonders cards. And in many ways, I liked them even better. I thought the detail was better. I thought the execution was even a little better. So that really drew me to it. I also really like the idea of the different ages and this technology tree that you could, sort of follow. This idea of one technology sort of naturally leads to another, but you're not necessarily railroaded into a particular path. You can always sort of investigate and learn about any kind of new technology. It just may not be as efficient. So if I'm kind of going down one sort of logical sort of, path towards different kinds of technologies, they're going to synergize with each other. They're going to logically lead from one to the next. If you get into, bronze, and then bronze will lead you to iron, and iron will lead you, further and further up the technology tree, as it were, smelting and all of this other kind of stuff that's gonna happen. But it doesn't mean that I can't study and learn about agriculture. It just means that that's going to be sort of that's going to be like a new area for me to kind of explore. And because I don't really have any background knowledge on it, it might take me longer to sort of come up with those ideas and advance that technology. So I like the fact that you're encouraged to follow a kind of line or two of technologies, but you're not shoehorned into it. You do have other opportunities, and you can develop other technologies. And in many ways, after playing the game quite a few times, you're really, actively encouraged to do that. It really pays to be diversified as much as you possibly can. So I really was intrigued, and I decided to back the project. Now, the first thing I want to say about the project after the art is the fact that I don't know that I've ever seen a Kickstarter run that quickly or that well. The people at NKSN, I got to be honest with you, just blew me away with a couple of different things. Number one, they were very upfront about their timetable. Number two, they communicated very regularly. Number three, whether it's just how awesome they are or incredible good fortune, the timetable was actually exactly what they stated it was going to be. The turnaround time was incredibly quick. This is kind of the way I feel the Kickstarter should be run. They pretty much had all of the game done, as far as I can tell, and ready to go. Like the card art was done. This wasn't like, give us the money and we'll develop the card art. We got this dude named Chuck who's a great artist and he's going to make these cards, and here's a couple samples for you to ooh and ah over. But then it's going to take Chuck like a few months at least to kind of do all the cards, and then we're going to do this, and then we'll put the order in with the printer, and then I think they had all this done. I don't really know, but I can't really fathom how else they could have gotten it done so quickly, because this Kickstarter, I think, took maybe 4 or 5 months, if that. It was probably the fastest turnaround time of any Kickstarter that I've ever seen. Their communication was great. The information they sent, the updates were wonderful. They were really on the ball. I mean, I gotta say, I was really impressed with how they ran their Kickstarter. And, some of that I know, because I know people in publishing, is also good fortune. Things can go wrong at the printers. There can be delays in shipping. You can get bumped on the schedule. But you know what? All the stars aligned, and these guys must have done their due diligence, because this thing came very quickly to me. I got a shipping notice. The game was there 2 days later. And they shipped all over the world. And they sort of did it simultaneously. I don't really know how they did it, but it seems like just about everybody got their game roughly at the same time, unless you were in like Poland or Germany, you got a little bit earlier. It was really, really well done. I mean, the logistics of it, the distribution of it, they did a really nice job. So I think for those people out there who do Kickstarters or are thinking about doing Kickstarters, you might want to reach out to these guys, because I'm not exactly sure how they pulled it off, but they pulled it off very well. All right, so that's enough about the sort of why I was interested in the game and what I think about the Kickstarter. Let's talk about the game itself. So the game comes with, beautiful cards, which, I absolutely adore. The art was everything that I hoped it would be. The technology kind of tree charts that come with it are fantastic. The Kickstarter version had a couple of extra decks that were included for sort of special kind of personages and personalities that you can add to the game. I haven't even played with those yet, to be honest with you. And then it also includes this sort of age 4, this modern age to the game. So now you're going all the way from the invention of the wheel all the way up to flight and everything else, right? So really, really nice sweep of technology. The technology tree chart is very easy to kind of read and reference. I found that to be really, really useful and enjoyed that as well. You have your standard serviceable little wooden cubes for your player markers, and you have wonderful little action tokens that come so that you can kind of keep track of your actions. You also have little markers to kind of give you a reminder of when you're going to move from one age to another age, which I found very handy. And then you have these nice little cardboard tokens for the different sorts of kind of general knowledge, you can think of it, or specific knowledge. So there's knowledge of things like engineering, and there's knowledge of like architecture and art, and there's these tokens that you can accumulate during the game based on cards that you played, and those kind of become currency. Like you can spend them every turn, every round that you have, you can spend them to meet the requirements of new cards, because the way the game works is every card that you have in your hand that you might want to put into play is going to have a cost to it. And that cost is either going to be a certain type of knowledge. So it could be engineering knowledge, or it could be, something, it could be general knowledge, which is kind of like a wild knowledge. It could be anything. Or it's going to have a requirement of a certain type of technology. So you can either play 3 engineering, say to build this card, or you can already have masonry. So masonry allows you, for example, to build bridges, right? So if I have masonry, I can build bridges for free. But otherwise, if I have enough engineering knowledge, which I may have acquired from other cards, I can just flip those tokens over to kind of expend them, and they're going to refresh at the end, which is really nice. But I can flip them over to expend them so that I can put out that card. Another thing you can do, which I really like, is if you don't have the prerequisite card, this is what I was talking about at the top of the review, and you don't have those knowledge tokens, you can simply decide to kind of research it, to think about it, right? And so what you're going to do is you're going to place a certain number of these black cubes onto the card, and every time it comes back around to your turn, you remove one of those cubes from the card. When you remove the last one, you have your eureka moment. You're like, haha, I now understand irrigated agriculture, and that card immediately comes into effect. You gain whatever benefit that it gives you, and now you might have a prerequisite card for a later technology, which is also going to be helpful. Even while you're thinking about it, you can use the card as kind of a prerequisite. You don't get the benefit of the card, but you can use it as a prerequisite for building other and better cards. So that's another reason why you might want to research a card, right? I can't really afford to just come up with it right off the top of my head. It doesn't naturally flow. So, but as I'm thinking about it and developing it, working towards that eureka moment, I'm also thinking about other possibilities as well and other connections. So that's a really kind of a neat aspect of the game. Finally, there is a central board that came with the Kickstarter that just holds the cards. It's nice, not necessary, but it is definitely nice. And finally, you have the player boards, which are just wonderful. The player boards, to me, I think were very clearly modeled after the Clash of Cultures boards, because they're the same kind of thick, heavy cardboard stock, and they have the, square punch-outs so that your cubes fit into those little areas. And so the player boards do a lot of different things for you. They track a lot of information for you. And what they're doing is they're basically tracking what's called your skills. So you have sort of a hand size skill, right? It's kind of like your ability to kind of juggle different ideas and thoughts, if you want to think of it that way. Then you have what's called your draw skill. And this is when you draw cards, the number of cards you're going to draw. So you start off with 3, but you can improve it to 4, 5, even all the way up to 6 if you want to, okay? Then you have what's called your lightning draw kind of skill, which is related. The lightning draw skill is usually what it's going to require you. It's going to let you draw cards, and you're going to have to discard some cards as well. And you're not going to draw as many cards. And that's because, if it sounds silly that you have 2 draw powers, the main draw power, you can just draw a bunch of cards, that has to be the last action you take on your turn. If you do that as the first thing you do on your turn's over. So sometimes you're kind of stymied, like you need cards to pay for a new idea that you're having, because another thing that I didn't even mention, unfortunately, I forgot about it till just now, so I apologize, is that every card has sort of like a little icon at the bottom of it, and it will tell you how many points of sort of knowledge or ideas it's worth, and then it's all kind of that wild idea, so it can apply to anything. So basically, okay, you can put a card into play because you have the prerequisite technology. Most efficient, best way to do it. Second, you can research a card, and over time you can take those cubes off that I mentioned until you have your eureka moment, and now you have that card in play. Or you can play a card and pay for it with other cards. And each of the cards that you have in your hand has that number on the bottom. It could be anywhere from 1 to, I think the highest is 3 or 4. And so that can go towards the cost of deploying a card and putting it into your display. But those are going to get discarded. And so those form a discard pile. And when a player does a draw action or a lightning draw action, they can draw from the top of the deck, or they can draw from the top of the discard pile. So again, you got this kind of rummy on the pile thing where you got to be careful about what you throw, because if you throw a card that is a natural extension to another player's developments that they already have in play, they could just snap that up and then slap it down. So it's really kind of an interesting little tension point, right? So the lightning draw that I'm speaking of is a draw action that you can take. It's much more limited, but you can do it and then still do other things on your turn. So if I'm only 1 or 2 knowledge points short to being able to put a card into my display, since every card can be discarded for knowledge, I might use that lightning draw action to draw 2, discard 1, get rid of a card that I don't want. But this one is worth 2 points, which is all that I needed, and boom, now I can discard that to deploy this card. And so you start getting these sort of chaining of actions in this game. There's a whole shuffle ability that you have where you can take the discard pile and shuffle it into the deck and then draw cards from the top of the draw pile again. again, right? So you can do this defensively. Like if I have to discard a card that I know another player wants, I can take that shuffle action just to bury it so they can't get it. It's not right on top, which is a real nasty move, but one I appreciate. Or you can do it because you know that further down in that discard pile is a card that you want, and the only way you're really going to get that is, you're going to increase your chances by shuffling it back into that main deck and seeing if it pops. So that's that ability. You also have an action ability. So everybody starts off with 2 actions per round or per turn, if you want to think of it that way. But you can bump that all the way up to 4 or even 5 actions. So again, it's like an engine building. It's a snowballing, right? Technologies start to pay for other technologies. You get more diverse. You get more free technologies. Your draw power increases. Your hand size increases. You can even increase your skills in that sort of research I was talking about. So when you research a card and you don't expend cards to pay for it and you don't have the prerequisite technology, you can put the card in your display with those black cubes on it. Well, when you first start the game, you can put 4. You have to put 4 on the card. So it's going to basically take you 4 more turns before that card comes into play for you. But if you improve that area of your technology tree, that you might only have to put 3 on it, or you might only have to put 2 cubes on it. So you're getting better and better, more and more efficient at researching and thinking about these new ideas, right? And then there's a final skill which determines the number of those cards you can have being researched in front of you at any one time. So everybody starts out at 1, but you can bump that all the way up to 4. So all of these little tracks are on this wonderful little player board that has that, Clash of Cultures style punch outs where you put your cubes so that you don't just bump your board and jostle everything. So what do I think about the gameplay? We already know I love the components. We already know I love technology and tech trees. The gameplay is a lot of fun. It's very satisfying to build your technology tree. It is, however, very much a solitaire-ish kind of affair. There's very little that you can do to directly affect another player or impact another player. So to me, this is a perfect couples game because I can sit down with my wife and we can knock this game out in like 30 minutes and 40 minutes and have a blast, depending on how many ages we're going through, right? But when it comes to a multiplayer game, and one of the reasons I got the game is because it plays up to 5 players, is that as you start to get more and more actions on your personal board, you increase that ability. And players are now taking 3 or 4 actions all kind of chained together in unique and interesting ways, right? The downtime can start to become a little bit of an issue because there's a lot to think about in the game. And the order in which you do things can have a big impact on how successful your turn is. So to me, that's a really cool thing because it gives you a lot to think about. However, when it's not your turn, you have nothing to think about. There really isn't anything for you to do. You can watch those discard piles and you can say, okay, ooh, that card looks good. I hope it's still there when my turn comes around because I'd like to grab that. Somebody put 1 on top of it. Well, it's not a big deal because my lightning draw action is 2 cards, so I can drill down. I can take 2 from the discard pile and they'll still be there. Oh, no, somebody put another 1 on there. They put 3 on there. Oh, man, they paid for that technology with that. Jeez. All right, well, kiss that plan goodbye unless I want to reshuffle it in there. There's really not much you can do. So you just kind of sit there passively and kind of wait. Does it feel like a Civilization game? A little bit, yeah. Because as your technologies lead from one thing to another, you kind of get this little story unfolding in front of you of your sort of civilization as you watch them move through agriculture into medicine and then moving from medicine into, these different areas. Really interesting, kind of fun stuff. When you look back at your display at the end of the game, you see this little story that's been told. Does it feel like a Civilization game? I ask the same question again. The answer is no. How can it be both yes and no? Well, it's yes because the tech tree tells a wonderful story, and it's one of my favorite parts of any Civilization game. No, because there's almost no player interaction. And no, because, of course, there's no map, there's no direct conflict, there's no exploration. So, to me, this is a really fun, thematic card game. It's an engine building game. It is a thematic engine building card game. And I really enjoy it. But it's not a Civ game. It's not a game that's really going to in any way replace Through the Ages or Clash of Cultures or Civilization. It's just not going to do it. So I don't know that it's even fair. I don't even know that NKSN or the designers claim this is a Civilization game. They didn't. They just claimed that it was Tech Tree made into a game. And for that, I think they were totally successful. I really enjoy that part of the game. My only gripe about the game, my only concern about the game, is that I feel this is a 2 or 3 player game. I really think it's probably best with 2 as a couples game, because there you don't notice the downtime, you don't care about the downtime, and you actually have more of an opportunity to use those discards. You have an opportunity to manipulate the timing of the game. One of the things I didn't mention is that when you move from age 1 to age 2, no problem. When you move from age 2 to age 3, it kind of borrows that 18XX Rust kind of thing. Any cards that you still have in your display in front of you that you were researching when you go into age 3 that are from age 1, go away. Okay? It's too old now. It's too late. Time has marched on. So those cards are now gone. And so you can really kind of plan that out well in a 2-player game and really mess with your opponent if you have a way to accelerate the next age while they're still developing technologies. That can be really nice and mean and nasty. But other than that, there's very little interaction in the game. So I like it as a couples game. I love the art. I love the production. I think they did a phenomenal job on their Kickstarter. I commend them for that greatly. And so I recommend Progress, Evolution of Technology, as a great couples game or 3-player game if you're looking for that thematic engine building card game experience. Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode of The Long View. I, of course, want to thank Ryan Sturm for joining me tonight to talk about Age of Steam. Thanks for all of his expertise and his knowledge and his enthusiasm about his favorite game, and I know I learned a lot from it, and I really hope everyone out there has a chance to try this great and venerable game that has spawned so many offshoots, so many expansions, and continues to be a fascinating game even today, so long after its original release. I, of course, want to thank the Dicetower.com. The Longview is a proud member of the Dice Tower Network. Please go and check out all the other fantastic podcasts in the network, and check out the latest news and reviews from Tom and Eric and Z and the gang. So thanks to them for their continued support. I also, of course, want to send a shout out to my sponsor, GameSurplus.com. Thanks to them for their continued support of The Long View, and if you're looking for a copy of Age of Steam or any of the other great games that you've heard about on tonight's podcast, I encourage you to go to GameSurplus.com and find out why they are your first and best choice for online board gaming purchases. And if there's not a title in stock, they'll be sure to grab it for you. Just send Velma an email at games@GameSurplus.com, and she'll track it down for you just as quick as can be. Find out why everybody raves about Game Surplus service and prices and shipping at www.gamesurplus.com. I also, of course, want to encourage anyone who lives here in the northeastern Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, or southern New York region to come to the Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, conveniently located right off of Interstate 80 on Main Street. This is a growing resource and a phenomenal resource for gamers in our area. They have tons of open gaming space, a knowledgeable and friendly staff, and a huge selection of board game titles for you to peruse and purchase. If you're looking for the latest and greatest in gaming, go no further than the Gamer's Edge on Main Street in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. Thanks, of course, to everybody out there as well for listening, and have a wonderful night.